Generally speaking, in the current climate, yes. And I guess the idea is that you use emotion and personal beliefs, and particularly the idea that certain groups might have very fixed beliefs to generate opinion that is not always based on factual reality. So I guess, and we'll go through some examples, but I guess that idea of divorcing the truth from something you have to prove factually. Does anyone else? We'll keep coming back to that concept as we go. So these are the little demonstrations of the use of the term that you're familiar with from dictionaries. Oh, no, you're not going to keep locking on me, are you? Okay. So this first example, I think, is very important. In the era of post-truth politics, it's easy to cherry-pick data and come to whatever conclusion you desire. So the idea is that it's not necessarily just that you're appealing to people based on emotion with no facts, but the idea that you can choose the particular facts, the particular studies, the particular data you have in mind to produce a narrative that suits your purposes. So we're going to talk in the workshops today. I'm going to get you to work through an exercise talking about this in terms of climate change, for example. So both sides arguing about climate change do bring forward scientific studies, but the question is, so then the question is to determine between them and to do some critical thinking about what kind of studies they are they the right studies to back up the claims, and these sorts of things. So we'll look at that. So in order to have truth, we need to have post-truth, we need to have truth. So the quality, and then we're going to go a little bit philosophical in this lecture. Not as philosophical as those of you who do philosophy are used to, but we'll touch on it in the sort of cultural studies context. So truth having the quality or state of being true. So something inherent in that which is true or in accordance with fact or reality. So this is an important definition for us in terms of it being a relationship to something else that is real, rather than something that is opinion-based. Or, and this I guess is the one that reminds us more of discourse, a fact or belief that is accepted as true. So, for example, in the Middle Ages, the world was considered to be flat, and that was considered to be true. And, you know, relatively speaking, for those people, you could consider that to be true. However, by the second definition, that it has to be with fact or reality, we know that that was not true. So you see that it sort of depends on your definition of true. And in recent times, sort of influenced by postmodernism and these sorts of things, there has risen this idea that there are multiple truths. And this is part of the post-truth era. So true, accordance of fact or reality, and accurate or exact. So I guess the idea is that for something to be true, it can't be approximately right. It needs to actually be completely accurate or exact to what it is trying to express. So when people talk about a half-truth, traditionally a half-truth isn't actually true because it's not, according to this definition, it's not fully true. So, of course, all this is relying on the use of the term facts. And I know these are straightforward words, but it's useful to think about where they come from and what they're sort of denoting, different ways we interpret them. A thing that is known or proved to be true, so how do you know it, is something of consideration, and how do you prove it? So this is where argumentation skills and this sort of thing come in, but hopefully it goes beyond just an argument to something with more basis. Information used as evidence or part of a report or news article. So you can see in having that as the first sub-definition, the idea of facts being very important to news media is highlighted, used to refer to a particular situation, and in legal sense, the truth about events as opposed to interpretation. So we are used to there being lots of different interpretations of things, and in the state of post-truth, one of the key questions is, are all interpretations equally valid, or are there some that are more valid than others based on facts? So I'm going to show you a video. This is from, we're going to look at this twice, so we'll do an analysis of that the second time. Quick question?
So facts and evidence, are they kind of like kind of the one thing with like that proves whether one who post-truth is more correct than another?
Yes.
If that makes sense.
I think I know what you mean.
You
need evidence and facts to prove if something is true, and post-truth is the idea that it doesn't really matter, I guess, and that's why it said in that video, this is particularly, treading on the mic, this is particularly in relationship to the idea of post-truth politics, that this term we use, that it is not as important to know in politics at the moment for what you say to be true. That is not as significant as other factors. So, was that my mic? No. This video is from Meet the Press, which is a famous interview format show in the US, where they're interviewing Kellyanne Conway. Some of you may be familiar with. She is a key advisor and not PR person, but sort of, they call them surrogates for Donald Trump. And this is very briefly after don't let this turn off. This is very briefly after they got in, after the inauguration, and there was some dispute about the size of the inauguration crowd. So some of you may be familiar with this, but basically people were the media, news media in general was making fun of Trump because his inauguration crowd was, according to photographs of said crowd, was smaller than Obama's one. And so in the very first outing of the press secretary claimed and stood by the fact that it was not, in fact, smaller. It was, in fact, larger, and the largest that had ever been at an inauguration. So this is the challenge to that.
So is that for Obama's inauguration, like the biggest one they ever had?
No. For Trump's to be the biggest one they ever had.
Oh, wait, so, yeah, it wasn't actually, was it?
No. Oh. No. I will get to this video and then I'll go out of...
Explain, you did not answer the question. Why did the president send out his press secretary, who's not just the spokesperson for Donald Trump, he also serves as the spokesperson for all of America at times. He speaks for all of the country at times. Why put him out there for the very first time in front of that podium to utter a provable falsehood? It's a small thing, but the first time he confronts the public, it's a falsehood?
Chuck, I mean, if we're going to keep referring to our press secretary in those types of terms, I think that we're going to have to rethink our relationship here. I want to have a great open relationship with our press, but look what happened the day before, talking about falsehoods. We allowed the press to come into the Oval Office and witness President Trump signing executive orders. And of course, you know, the Senate had just confirmed General Mattis and General Kelly to their 2 posts, and we allow the press in, and what happens almost immediately? A falsehood is told about removing the bust of Martin Luther King Jr. from the Oval Office. That's just flat out false. And
it was corrected immediately.
Chuck, why was it said? Chuck, why was it said in the first place? Because everybody is so presumptively negative.
Climb into the head of that reporter.
No, that it's okay. No, excuse me. Oh, no. That reporter was writing on behalf of the press pool. That falsehood got spread 3,000 times before it was corrected.
Excuse
and
me.
It's still out there.
It does not excuse, and you did not answer the question.
I did answer your question.
No, you did not. You did not answer the question of why the president asked the White House press secretary to come out in front of the podium for the first time and utter a falsehood. Why did he do that? It undermines the credibility of the entire White House press office on day one.
Don't be so overly dramatic about it, Chuck. You're saying it's a falsehood, and they're giving Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that. But the point remains.
Wait a minute. Alternative facts? Alternative facts, 4 of the 5 facts he uttered. The one thing he got right was Zeke Miller. 4 of the 5 facts he uttered were just not true. Look, alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods.
Chuck, do you think it's a fact or not that millions of people have lost their plans, their health insurance, and their doctors under President Obama? Do you think it's a fact that everything we heard from these women yesterday happened on the watch of Barack Obama? He was president for 8 years. Donald Trump's been here for about 8 hours. Do you think it's a fact that millions of women, 16.1 million women, as I stand here before you today, are in poverty along with their kids? Do you think it's a fact that millions don't have health care? Do you think it's a fact that we spent billions of dollars on education in the last 8 years only to have millions of kids still stuck in schools that fail them every single day? These are the facts that I want the press corps to cover, and this is why I'm here at the White House,
I understand
to change
what I don't
awful
understand
numbers like that.
That is not what yesterday was about. So you have not answered the question. You did not answer the question.
It's what this presidency is going to be about.
You sent the press secretary out there to utter a falsehood on the smallest, pettiest thing.
I don't think anybody can prove that. Look, I actually don't think that. Maybe this is me as a pollster, Chuck, and you know data well. I don't think you can prove those numbers one way or the other. There's no way to really quantify crowds. We all know that. You can laugh at me all you want, but I'm very glad.
I'm just befuddled.
Well, but you are, and I think it's actually symbolic of the way we're treated by the press. The way that you just laughed at me is actually symbolic of the way, very representative of the way we're treated by the press. I'll just ignore it. I'm bigger than that. I'm a kind and gracious person.
I think this interview is probably the best of all illustrations of this concept of post-truth and an argumentation style and techniques that are based upon the idea that you can really argue anything you want. And in some cases, people will believe you. In some cases, they won't believe you. But I guess the question here is whether or not there needs to actually be a push for the idea of the truth and the idea of facts and what can be proved and what cannot be proved. Not really new. We're very used to politicians, lying, making things up, cherry-picking data and distorting things in various kinds of ways. But I guess this is a very outright assault on the idea that the use of the term alternative facts, and I'm sure she did just come up with that on the spot, and it was very unfortunate for her that she did that. But the use of the idea alternative facts very much draws on this idea within post-truth that everyone has facts and everyone can back everything up. Rather than necessarily looking to what the actual evidence is and questioning how you've come about to find evidence that you can actually believe in.
What I think Trump is doing is he's not just
the multiplication of lies. Yes?
We are at war with these people.
Yeah.
We have always been at war with these people.
Yeah.
Just destroying history because that will prove that you're wrong now, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Just pushing these false ideas to make the truth harder to see.
And we're going to talk about Hannah Arendt a little bit later on, who's a fantastic philosopher who wrote a book called The Origins of Totalitarianism, which 1984 very much draws on, where she talks about those sorts of practices in regimes of that kind.
Can't like you sticking very much to the Chewbacca defense.
The Chewbacca defense.
From South Park.
Okay.
Argue your case entirely on the point of, yeah, my point is correct. Just consider this. Chewbacca lives on Endor with the Ewoks. Isn't that strange? You don't actually draw anything from the case. You just yell something out.
Yell louder.
Thinking about that.
Yep.
So
And
she was going on about women's facts and
yeah.
how they were like this, and it had nothing to do with the point. And she just kept arguing that defense.
So it's going beside the point, but also potentially appealing to emotional topics, people living in poverty and these sorts of things that, you know, are more important than the size of the inauguration crowd, but they aren't necessarily, that's a sort of a technique rather than potentially genuine concern there. So we're going to watch that video once again and do a bit of an analysis later. So this is a quote that was mentioned in the first video you saw. The truth has become so devalued that what was once the gold standard of political debate is a worthless currency. I think this is probably an overreaction in some ways, but it is, now that I'm in here, maybe I can, are we a little while before the videos? Okay, but I guess it does speak towards a decline in the importance of, which feeds in with that idea of cynicism that you looked at in the readings, with young people feeling that mistrust for the mainstream media and for the government. If you have that much mistrust, you actually kind of, even if it's well-founded, you lead to a situation where you kind of expect lies, and then if you expect lies, maybe you don't necessarily take them as seriously or be as concerned about them. So this is one of the concerns. So this all brings us back to discourse. I know I keep bringing us back to discourse every week. So if we think about what the relationship is between truth or facts and discourse, discourse, as we've looked at, is the assembly of lots of different ideas and representations of things that build up an idea of something. Discourse looks like the truth in most cases. Well, okay, let me rephrase that. The dominant discourse looks like the truth because everyone accepts it to be true, or most people accept it to be true. So that's getting back to the third definition of truth that we went through from the Oxford Dictionary. Discourse relies on facts, but those facts are usually not, sometimes, but often not the kinds of sort of empirical facts that we can determine. They can be facts like, oh, well, I met someone like XYZ and they did XYZ. So they tend to be more personal facts, an assembly of perhaps things you've seen on the television about different groups and so forth. And I guess the idea is you have an idea of a truth built up, but what kinds of facts is it built up by? And I guess that's what you need to interrogate if you're looking into the truth, is what kind of facts is it based on, and how do you evaluate those facts? Not all facts are equal. So it's this idea of, I guess, a socially agreed upon truth. But there's also a discourse surrounding truth and facts. When the interviewer, what's his name, Jake Tapper, I think, of Kellyanne Conway, is saying, this is a falsehood, this is a falsehood, this is a falsehood. This is part of a discourse that facts and the truth are very important. And I think that is still, no matter what people are saying, I think that is still the dominant discourse in our society, that we do want to establish what is true or what is not true. But there is potentially an alternative discourse to that that de-emphasizes truth and facts at the expense of what is good and true, or these sorts of things. So I brought this slide up briefly last week, but it is, but didn't get a chance to go through it, and it's talking about the partisan consumption of traditional and social media, and we talked about this a little bit in the workshops. But this is a very important aspect of the age of post-truth. People use the term like echo chambers. And the idea is, if you only consume a particular kind of media, you will not necessarily get a diversity of viewpoints. You will get lots and lots of information that will back up your ideas of what is true, what is real, and thus potentially form an opinion or an idea of what is true based on a very biased, or at least a very limited sample of things. Because what we think about when we think about something like critical thinking, which is sort of the answer to this, is that you need to also evaluate the other side and sort of compare their facts and compare their ideas in order to determine what is true, sort of unmoored from opinion or a particular ideology or sort of personal belief. It also limits the range of issues that are considered to be important. So last week we looked at the platforms for Labor and Liberal, and they were very similar on most, on what the issues were that they thought were important, but you will recall there were some differences in how these were framed. So one saying, amazing quality healthcare, and one saying healthcare for everybody. Or there were also some points that didn't correlate through the two platforms. So obviously, if you are consuming only the partisan side of one, you might be reinforced by all the facts and all that back up the idea that it's about the quality healthcare versus and not take into consideration the healthcare for all element, or vice versa. This can lead to a situation where there is simply not enough common ground to debate. So this is when we kind of devolve into politicians shouting at each other, really, because there aren't, if you don't agree on what the facts are, you can't really debate with someone, because you're just going to present a different set of alternative facts to each other, and thereby there's nothing really to work with. I'm going to... Has anyone watched Stephen Colbert Report? Yeah, like 3 people. This is I think this is interesting, because in this comedy news or fake news, this term truthiness was coined in 2005, which I think you'll agree from the definition, from this speech here, is remarkably similar to the idea of post-truth. So the Colbert, it's a sort of, it's a satire. He pretends to be Bill O'Reilly, who's a very famous conservative news anchor and talk show host, and he sort of takes on those mannerisms and those speeches and so forth. So you can see sort of branding things as elitist and so forth. But I like this definition here, constantly telling us what it... Oh, I'm no fan of dictionaries or reference books. They're elitist, constantly telling us what is or isn't true, or what did or didn't happen. Who's Britannica to tell me that the Panama Canal was finished in 1914? If I want to say it happened in 1941, that's my right. I don't trust books. They're all fact, no heart. I guess 11 years before we had this term post-truth being word of the year, this presents, I guess, a very similar attitude to what we now characterize as post-truth. It is a satire. Satire is based on something that is happening in society. And he further goes on to it didn't have all the facts, but it had certain truthiness about it. So I guess this idea of what feels true as being important, potentially more important than facts necessarily. So I'm going to now talk a little bit about fake news. Now, there are many different definitions of fake news. In your reading this week, you're looking at what is now the older definition of fake news. It's not that old, but it's already changed a little bit. That basically is seeing comedy news as being fake news. Obviously, most comedy news is fake news. Some of it has to...
Isn't it satire, Ben?
Santa? What?
Satire.
Yes. Yes, yes.
S-A-T-I-R-E.
Yes. It's satire, but it's also presenting news. And there was a time, I think in 2008, where they did a poll that found that the two most watched news programs in the US was The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, which was a comedy news, and Bill O'Reilly, which was an opinion-based news. So the sort of the idea that fake news is actually a source where lots of people do get their news. Certainly a lot of information about US politics as it makes it through to things like The Daily Show and these sorts of things do have a certain salience, but they tend to then be interspersed with jokes that are clearly presenting something to be false, you know, calling someone a turtle or whatever it is. This is actually a thing on The Daily Show. So you can see, so predominantly fake news was the idea of satirical news. More recently, as I'll talk about in this section, it is the explicitly fake stories that present themselves as news, which we now call fake news. And I think that's a very different thing to news satire. It has a different purpose, and it also, I guess, offers different things in that respect. So there is also the very new definition in the last couple of months coined by President Trump of using the term fake news to accuse news organizations of bias. So this has famously been used in terms of CNN, which was the network that that interview took place on, which has been very critical of the administration, which was roundly called fake news. And New York Times, which was also very critical, was called fake news. So in the debate of what is real or not real and alternative facts and all this sort of thing, the idea that you can use this term to sort of dismiss, actually, very venerable news organizations renders the truth as they present it into merely opinion. And thus you kind of get a war of opinions rather than necessarily of facts again. So this is a graph of Facebook engagement. So that's like likes and shares and comments for the top 20 US election stories last year. And you can see that mainstream news was certainly the most dominant at the beginning, or at the beginning of the year. But it declined, maybe as people got sick of the whole thing, whereas fake news rose sharply. The consumption of fake news rose sharply. So what this suggests is that, just a minute, is that what this shows is that more people were getting their information from news that was explicitly fake. Now, many of those people knew it was fake, but presumably many of those people did not know it was fake. So it has that awkwardness.
So fake news, that's constituted by like clickbait stuff too, like kind of stuff you see on like Snapchat or Facebook. That's just complete nonsense.
Yeah. So anything that is devoid of actual facts or substantiation, and a lot of it is like really quite silly or quite inflammatory. So it tends to have that quality of being, very over the top to get you to click on the header and so forth. And I've got quite a few examples here that I will go into.
I was just going to make an example of the whole employees and Nazi thing that like big news companies took over to pretty much just attack YouTube as a whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And YouTube was like the head for that, and they took a lot of what he said out of context to make it seem worse than it was. When he was in context, it was clearly a joke.
Yep.
And I know he did some stuff that was pretty bad and stuff like that, but it would be like if he said, "Look, guys, I'm not a Nazi," and they just blurt out the word "not," and just like force the point.
Yeah. So it's certainly not just the case that these are devoid of facts, but they can be taking facts out of context, pulling in examples of things that have no relevance, or they're overblowing the significance of them, and so forth. So the top, I kind of love that I'm using a BuzzFeed list, but anyway. The top fake political news stories versus and the crime news stories. So if you have a look, some of them are clearly quite ridiculous. So I think particularly on the crime list, there's some that you would just kind of go, oh, fake news immediately that you saw it. But some of them are perhaps more likely to interest people and attract. If you're consuming partisan news, and these are usually posted into partisan feeds, What are you potentially going to see something as just another example of what you already believe? So, for example, in the top one, the top shared political news, and obviously shared a lot more than the others, Obama signs an executive order banning the Pledge of Allegiance in schools nationwide. So, if you already think or already thought that Obama was terrible and, you know, he was a communist and he was whatever he's being called, you would potentially think that that might be true. It's not true, but you would potentially think that that might be true. And then that potentially becomes one of the facts that you've read on the news that is then fed into your discourse about what Obama is and how bad Obama is and, you know, how the country is being destroyed and all this sort of stuff. The Pope Francis one, I must confess, I clicked on this one because I was like, no, really? But again, potentially could be true. You know, and potentially then influencing people who would care that, you know, who Pope Francis was putting forward. Now, you'll notice in the political news that it tends to favour one side over the other. This is generally the case with fake news, that it tends to favour the more conservative side. Yeah, with the only one I'd see is outside that being Rage Against the Machine making a Donald Trump album, which is just like, I mean, anti-Donald Trump album. So there can be a political element as well, ideological element within the non-explicitly political list. So if you look at the second one from the bottom on the crime news, police find 19 white female bodies in freezers with Black Lives Matter carved into skin. It's a pretty full-on thing. I assume you agree. If it were true, that is pretty intense. But as it's not true, it's reinforcing an idea and presenting a very emotional fact. I'm using fact in quotation marks here for people who are listening to the recording. That may reinforce your prejudices against the Black Lives Matter activists, which were already very strongly mobilised in the fake news discourse.
When it says Florida man, it instantly becomes more plausible because apparently people in Florida are insane. It's just something that I've heard.
Okay, that's totally an alternative fact, I'm thinking there.
Yeah. Florida man. Crazy news from Florida that is like in actual news.
It has this entire Twitter feed of all the news in Florida with just Florida man, and he's pretty much become a superhero because of all the ridiculous crimes. Stupid death.
So a discourse has been developed about Florida, which has led to a belief that these are facts. I guess that Florida people are whatever this Twitter feed is saying they are. So at the moment, has anyone been following the French elections?
No, because no one cares about France for some reason. I guess they're not mainstream enough.
Yes.
I'll bombard you every day on the internet.
SBS does pretty good coverage, but what has been happening in the French election is particularly important because people are saying the fate of Europe hangs on the French election. Basically, one side is anti the EU and would favour a sort of a Brexit situation where France leaves the EU as well, which would effectively cripple the EU if that happened. So the idea is that this election will really mean a lot to everyone in Europe most of whom do not have the opportunity to vote, obviously, in the French election. So it's a really high stakes election in that sense. So what has happened there recently? So this article is from a week ago. The spread of fake news has accelerated. So the 30 most popular fake or misleading articles have been shared 900,000 times just in 2 months. So if you think about how much information, what information people are gathering, things they're finding out about the political parties, about, you know, what the issues are about immigration, which is a key issue in this election as well, are perhaps not entirely accurate. Again, not everyone believes what they read in fake news, who shares it or likes it or whatever, but there does seem it does have the potential, at least, to be influential and to have people think that certain things are true. So there's just a quote here about, again, this sort of recontextualization of things. So, for example, one of the popular one viewed more than 15 million times in just over a month. Exactly a month. Showed a man assaulting 2 women in a hospital and made the story being about immigration, that it was, you know, a migrant who was doing this, but whereas in fact it was actually a video from Russia. It had nothing to do with a migrant to France attacking a French woman. However, people have seen video footage, and people tend to believe their eyes and see things as being a fact and as being evidence. So, of course, that does have a great potential to persuade people. So this is, I guess, the mobilization of alternative facts, which aren't really facts at all, but they feel like facts. So you've got to remember this idea of how it feels. And this is something that would make you feel awful that this happened to this woman as well. It has an emotional element there. No one really necessarily agrees what is fake and what is not fake. Some of them are clearly ridiculous. Some of them might come under question. Oh, well, is that really fake because it's from Florida or whatever the case may be? So it becomes then a battle of opinions, and no one really has a sense of what is real at that point, or what is real is not able to spread. So we talked about the drama being most popular in the mainstream media. It's easier to spread, especially in the context of social media, a really negative lie than it is to kind of go, oh, no, that was a lie, or here's this positive thing about a particular policy we're doing, or something like that. So it has to do with reach as well. Because, you know, this is how clickbait works, that you click on the really dramatic stories, or you tend to. So I'm going to just show some examples of fake news. Now this, like the... yes, it is fake. This is an example of satire, like, you know, like the comedy news. But again, it has a ring that it might be true. It uses things like calling itself the Rochdale Herald, which gives it a sort of, oh, it's a Herald, it's a proper newspaper, you know, that sort of thing. The formatting and so forth all these sorts of factors tend to kind of try to give a sense of it being news, so clearly satire. Something like this is probably more sinister because, you know, you don't necessarily want, if you are Obama's mother-in-law to be presented as being a criminal when you were not, and have that spreading through the world. Again, this is one that is obviously satirical, and in some ways, the sillier they are, the better they are, because at least they're kind of presenting themselves. Well, you see, but there is a sort of a demographic depending on the sort of party line, and until you think about it twice, you can kind of go, oh, you know, what's Sarah Palin doing now? If you're someone who is suspicious of Sarah Palin. So that's operating across those sorts of partisan lines too. Now this one is the really sinister one. So we saw that spread of the Black Lives Matter, that's what BLM is, It's not necessarily always the case that you're trying to make yourself look like you are, you know, live, you know, mainstream news, like the Rockdale Herald thing. But by presenting oneself as alternative news, as news that is going to tell you the truth that the mainstream media won't tell you, which, as you know from your reading, a lot of people feel the mainstream media is not telling them the truth, you can present a certain kind of legitimacy. Look, the mainstream media isn't even reporting this. Look at what's going on. This is very inflammatory, would you agree? Yeah. Yeah. So it...
Yes, Freedom Daily, that seems like a reliable source of news.
But if you are someone who does not trust the mainstream news and is aligned with those ideals of freedom or libertarianism or anything like this, it may have a certain salience. You, and then you.
I was watching the Daily Show, and they had on a guest who was that woman who got fired from her job because she was far right, but she said, I believe in...
Oh, Tony Lahren, yeah.
And she said that, because she believed all this fake news and stuff, she said that Black Lives Matter is the new KKK,
Yeah.
which is incredibly inflammatory.
Isn't the old KKK still what happened to the KKK?
Exactly. It's still around.
It's still around. Well, that's probably true.
Nazis.
Yep. Yeah, certainly. And I guess that speaks to the idea of partisan news, that you can only follow the party line. And Tony Lahren, I don't know if you guys have seen her, she's very shouty. Kind of represents that idea of, she's quite influential, and people who follow her tend to support the facts, the information that she's giving out on various topics. One more here.
Do you think we've got to say that a lot of mainstream media has like its own agenda following?
Oh, absolutely.
Like I was going to say, with Facebook especially, it's like they're only going to show you stuff that you've liked, or like even ads for things you've clicked on, and it's like, you know, pages that are just clickbait. It's like all of them are thriving to this, like because of their draconian guidelines, they can shut down or demonetize a page that's not like serving their agenda, like to advertise and make money.
Yeah, yeah. And mainstream media also does a very similar thing in terms of partisanship, that depending on who you vote for and who you support in your ideologies, you tend to watch particular channels, and you tend to have someone who predominantly watches SBS you could surmise has a different set of beliefs than someone who watches predominantly NBN on particular kinds of issues. So Fox and MSNBC are the similarities in the US, where one is considered to be the left-wing news channel and one is the right-wing news channel. And what they're presenting, They're presenting the same stories, but you would not know they are the same stories if you watch them side by side. They're essentially presenting a completely different worldview to each other. So this is probably the thing that made everyone start talking about fake news. It had been happening for a while.
Why
But-
Richard Nixon? Why did it have to be the Watergate? We could have had them stop and engage with every scandal, but you had to ruin everything.
So this will explain Pizzagate to you, this video, and then we'll talk about it.
News, real gunfire. A North Carolina man arrested in a D.C. pizza shop after brandishing a gun, telling police he was there to investigate a conspiracy theory called Pizzagate.
One of the hosts runs up and is like, "Did you see that guy? You know, he had a big gun."
We actually thought initially that he was a staff member because he was walking straight for that back room. Staff member, kind of looked at me and indicated that this was a gunman.
Edgar Welch appearing in court this afternoon. According to police, Welch said that he had read online that the Comet Ping Pong restaurant was harboring child sex slaves and that he wanted to see for himself if they were there. The suspect said he was armed to help rescue them. The accusation came from this unhinged story that originated online days before the election, saying that Hillary Clinton and her campaign chairman John Podesta were operating a child sex ring. The lie took root in the digital swamps of Twitter and far right-wing websites.
We're not covering Pizzagate enough, even though we covered it every day, to expose the Satanism and the occult and the code words for pedophilia.
October 30th, a Clinton-hating, Trump-loving Twitterer claimed a police source said Clinton was at the center of a pedophilia ring. Others latched onto this, seemingly hoping it was true, scouring dark corners of the web for possible clues. This is how conspiracy theories are threaded together, lie by lie. Eventually a name stuck, Pizzagate, and the believers started harassing the owner of the pizza place.
We've received many calls, but really they're from around the world, so we didn't expect anyone to come.
On Sunday, the suspect fired his weapon. No one was hurt. With detectives still on the scene in D.C., Pizzagate believers were already claiming that this real development was just part of a cover-up.
The media is claiming that this is because of Pizzagate. This is very dangerous fake news. Anybody claiming that the gunman today at Comet Pizza had anything to do with Pizzagate is lying.
Okay, so this is what made fake news really stand out in the media, that it has led to a sort of a real-life repercussion of someone going into a pizza place with a gun in order to free children who were put there by Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. Anyway, so what you have here is this interesting situation where the mainstream media, and you can see the language that they're using, is saying unhinged and this sort of thing, criticizing the fake news, but the response to that is also to say, well, your news is fake news, and this was, and the popular response was that this was a setup to distract the public attention, and that the gunman was an actor, and all these sorts of things in order to sort of balance out the idea so that both sides were calling each other fake news. There was not, I guess, that idea that anyone was really, I guess people were both looking for the facts, but they were only seeing both the facts they wanted to see, and when some actual evidence emerged, that evidence was not really making it to everyone who maybe needed to know about it, because that was considered to be fake news. I will give you an example. This is from the mainstream media, a show, albeit from on a local network. So it has, I guess, it has an authority that perhaps your freedom dailies don't necessarily have. So it's on CBS, which is one of the three big networks. I'm just going to show you the first bit of this, and then I want to ask you what techniques are being used in this video.
A major story weeks ago when an armed man decided to investigate a D.C. area pizza place for himself. This man right here, he carried a rifle into a pizza parlor and then fired it at the floor. Media is telling you the entire story is a hoax or fake news. But what does that even mean? I spent the last month investigating. So what exactly is Pizzagate? And are there any actual facts to support this story? I've got to warn you, what we're going to talk about tonight will be disturbing to some people. But this is a reality check you won't see anywhere else. Pizzagate actually comes from the WikiLeaks release of hacked emails from Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta. In all, WikiLeaks dumped around 50,000 email messages, and it was from those emails that the claims that John Podesta may be part of a child sex trafficking ring come from. Now, to be clear, not one single email in the Podesta emails discusses child sex trafficking or pedophilia. That is a fact. But there are dozens of what seem to be strangely worded emails dealing with pizza and handkerchiefs. Self-described online investigators say that those words in the emails about pizza and the talk of handkerchiefs is code language used by pedophiles. So how did a DC pizza parlor get pulled into the story? Well, again, read any mainstream report and they indicate that Comet Ping Pong Pizza was somehow linked to this fake story and has no relation to anyone involved. But the truth is, that's not true either. What media is ignoring is that the Comet Ping Pong Pizza place is actually referenced in the Podesta emails at least a dozen or so times, and that the owner of that place, James Alfantis, is a friend of John Podesta. He was actually named, this is kind of strange, by GQ magazine as one of the top 50 most powerful people in Washington. Yes, we're talking about a pizza parlor owner. Now let's talk facts here. There is no solid evidence that Comet Ping Pong Pizza is being used to run a child sex trafficking ring. But there are some very strange connections between Comet Ping Pong Pizza and a second pizza place 2 doors over, Besta Pizza, and the accusations of pedophilia. Now this is where things start to get strange when you research this story. Now to begin, I need to show you a 2007 unclassified FBI document. That document, according to the FBI, contains commonly used symbols by pedophiles to express their preference in children. I want you to see these images here. These are the images. Notice this one on the end, the triangle. That image signifies something called boy love. The pizza place next door to Comet Ping Pong Pizza, Besta Pizza, well, this was their logo until only a few weeks ago. Clearly, you can see that the Besta logo actually contains the same image, I'm going to show you again, as that boy lover image. Interestingly, after Pizzagate investigators pointed this out, Besta Pizza changed their logo, and there it is now. They've removed the triangle. Also, Comet Ping Pong, owned by Alfantis, is the place where a number of performance artists perform regularly. 2 of the groups that perform there, who you can see advertised, by the way, on this.
All right, okay. I think you get the idea. So this is on a mainstream network, thus carrying with it a certain weight of authority. What he did do, this particular guy was taken off the air for a little while after some other things he did about vaccinations and various other kinds of things with his reality check segment that was meant to check on what the mainstream media was leaving out. But he is back on the air and he's a news anchor. I guess it is quite interesting in that respect. So what kinds of techniques did you notice in there?
He presented himself as the alternative to the fake news. He was like, this is what they're reporting, these are the facts.
Yeah, yeah. So if
the impression that he's the only one you can trust.
Exactly. And if you already have a bit of a mistrust of the media, you're more likely to trust someone who presents an alternative. Yep.
presented things and then he would say but, and then talk about the other side of it. So he would act as though he was looking at the truth and then slice in some of the conspiracy as well. So it would be like, so yeah, these things about the conspiracy aren't true, but...
Look at this thing here. Yep. Anything else?
So they sort of just used a series of coincidences and, I don't know, just making stuff up as substitutes for evidence and facts.
Yep. Yep. So, but these are, I guess, presented as facts in that respect. Other?
I remember seeing this on Pizzagate thing on 4chan, and someone said, "Are we about to unravel the biggest conspiracy of the 21st century?" At the time, I couldn't tell if it was bullshit or if it was real, but yeah, it was it was a very what's the word? Just like pictured a very very kind of shocking thing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And the more shocking, in a way, the more interest people have, and potentially the more they're going to engage with it.
I kind of felt watching it, it was less about saying Pizzagate is real and all that, and it was more telling us why people believe Pizzagate is real. I didn't feel he was trying to say that it's real, just why the gunman thought it was real.
Yeah.
People thought think it's real.
Okay. And in terms of, I guess, how it's framed and what's being presented, yeah? Other observations?
Standard way a conspiracy theory works is to draw your attention to the things that seem just a little off and make you ignore the logic of whatever is going to actually be likely to happen.
Yeah.
By making you focus on, oh, this place next door has this symbol that they changed right off some of the news articles.
Yep. Maybe they didn't want to get shot.
He also used a lot of non-trustworthy sources. Like he used a magazine to say that the pizza owner was top 50 influential people in DC.
Yeah.
Like, because that's top news reporting there, a magazine article.
Yep. And all you have to judge his facts are their sourcing, really. I mean, do you know what is in the Podesta emails? No. Do you know that they've even looked at the FBI report, that there was an FBI report? Where that's, I guess, the importance of sourcing is that that's how we can tell how much to trust something, I guess. Other observations?
He never actually said what was specifically in the email. He just said there's this weird mention of pizza that comes up. It's obviously code.
Yeah.
It might just be that the people writing about it being obsessed with pizza.
Yes. Yes, there were a lot of emails there, so you'd mentioned pizza a couple of times. Any other observations? Now, I accidentally skipped ahead too much. So, in the wake of this event, and more recently, and in relationship to the French election and so forth, there have, of course, been responses to the idea of fake news and people trying to combat that in various ways. Now, Facebook came under particular fire after the US election. Facebook was credited with getting Trump elected through the spread of all that fake news.
Facebook actually credited, widespread getting Trump elected.
Sorry?
Do people actually think Facebook was responsible?
Well, this claim is based on the idea that that it's not entirely, I guess, but that it had influence by spreading things like 2.2 million emails saying the Democrats did this, and do you know what I mean? So through distributing fake news and doing nothing about fake news presenting itself on Facebook as real news, it has been argued that that played a role in the election.
I thought, I know people get 4chan and parts of a lot of credit for getting Trump in office.
Yeah.
Because apparently they seem like very, dedicated Trump supporters.
Yeah.
They're real issues more to actually have repeated.
Yeah. Still, at the end of the day, you got elected.
What
Don't
Facebook
have
is
it,
Yeah, but also,
Yeah.
I don't know about that. I think change you are still few people.
So in response to this, Mark Zuckerberg came out with a very long and confusing speech, but that its message was about that they were going to try harder and that they were going to get some third part. And they're like, well, we don't want to be the ones who decide what's fake and what's real because then that's censorship, but we'll hire these third parties to do that for us. So there's about 4 companies, I think, now that are hired to do some vetting of the fake news on Facebook. Obviously, it comes down to that question, well, is it fake? Or is it just opinion? Or, you know, where are the facts? So it's an incredibly difficult thing to vet something like fake news and to keep up with the amount and the speed at which it can spread. But I guess that is a broader social statement that this is a problem, or a recognition that this is a problem. Though some Facebook executives, there was one who was like, yeah, this is a problem we need to deal with. And then others have like, this isn't our problem, but we're going to kind of do this thing anyway.
With all this like North Korean and American stuff, like every time I go down my news feed, about 4 or 5 like fake news headlines pop up, and even though nothing else is eventuated, they just try and make it sound even more intense than it actually is. Like,
definitely.
But like nothing else has happened yet.
And that is the case about anything, because these things make money. These are businesses. They're you know, key people who own a lot of the sites, and it's excellent advertising revenue if you can get someone to share something that many times. So in some ways, I mean, we look at it as ideological, but it's not necessarily ideological. It might just be, that's what sells. That's what I can put out there and get a certain number of shares and attract that amount of advertising.
The issue with blocking certain types of fake news is like censorship. If decide what isn't okay to say, it starts getting a little bit.
Which is why Facebook does not want to do it itself, so they can blame someone else.
Opinions because they're not real.
Yeah.
It would be like
Well,
somebody who believed very strongly in science was like, well, I don't believe in religion, so I'm just a fan. Because they don't think it's real. Other people do. With fake news, it's a little bit different because it is spreading these ideas and inflammatory fake news. But again, you can't really just say, you can't say this because I don't like it.
Yeah.
And if you block certain people's views.
Yeah. In Germany, they have laws against hate speech and things that kind of whip up prejudice, and they get and it is the case there that things have to be taken down if they're considered to be hate speech or to be inflammatory towards particular groups. Google has done some things in terms of taking down or making them very low on their search, various fake news websites. Upworthy are doing this open source project where the guy who founded it has put a Google Doc or something like that into the world and said, everyone who has an idea about how we can end fake news, add it to this document, and then we will figure out what to do. So this is, I guess, an open source response to fake news. Taiwan have just put in their new curriculum, like high school curriculum, that all students must learn media literacy, which includes learning how to tell fake news from real news through things like sourcing and so forth. Yeah, which I think is very promising. There's a big campaign in the US for media literacy as well. I think it'd be great if we had it here. But I guess what all these things suggest is that the big online providers, at least, seem to have an overall idea of responsibility. That even if they don't, like Facebook is like, well, it's not really our fault, but we'll fix it. Is that kind of goes across going, this is a problem. Whoever caused it, it's our responsibility to do something about it. Which I guess helps reinforce the idea that in the contemporary media environment, we do need to have an attitude towards the truth and towards reinforcing the idea that there are facts and it's not just all opinion when it gets to that, I guess, extreme stage of the fake news. So there are various websites as well that are responses that have been around for ages. PolitiFact and FactCheck both look at what politicians say and go and collect evidence and see whether they're true or not. Snopes does it with sort of urban legends, but they do some political stuff as well. I've put the links here to this, but that you'll be able to get on the slides. But an academic put together a list of 130 fake news websites for her students in her media class. She's very enthusiastic, and put it online for them to use, and it went viral around in the media of people wanting to see what they were and so forth. FactCheck also has now done, I think, 150 sites list. Obviously, these change all the time, so lists are a bit harder to maintain. But I guess then that's the idea that individuals as well as universities are also getting involved in this. So I haven't given you a break, but we're going to finish early. Is that okay? Can you make it? Do you need a break? Okay. I forgot to give you a break. So your reading for this week, which will be looked at in the quiz, so make sure you do it. Her findings have to do, it was interesting that I asked various questions in the workshops last week that are questions that were also asked of the participants in this study. And some aspects of the findings did correlate, others did not so much. You guys are obviously a bit different in age than these participants. But there is the idea of online engagement that came up last week was very important. I think with many people saying they got lots of their news from Facebook and their information about elections and politics and so forth. And this fits in with the idea that there's been a shift in news filters from the sort of traditional media filters through to things like friends and parents, people you're friends with on Facebook and so forth, and the extent to which you trust media that's shared often comes from who has shared it. So a sort of reliance on that. There's also that significant mistrust of mainstream news, which I've mentioned a few times. And the appeal of opinion in that study definitely correlated with what is generally found, that strongly emotional or strongly opinion-based news tends to shine through. So, that example of Jon Stewart and Bill O'Reilly being sort of the main news people, that was opinion-based news. I mentioned Hannah Arendt before. Her family lived through the Holocaust, and most of her family did not live through the Holocaust. And her interest as a philosopher was in what caused the German people in general to go along with Hitler. Her theory, her discussion was not, how one person created something, but going, well, for this to happen, everyone has to go along. So why and how do you make everyone go along with things that generally you would not want to do? And so that was her sort of background, and she wrote an amazing book called The Origins of Totalitarianism, which I mentioned before, which is, I guess, the precursor to something like 1984, and the idea of, if you make someone lie for you, then they're sort of in a certain kind of relationship, and I guess the idea that totalitarianism can have an effect on a mass of people, and lead them to believe certain kinds of things, and the importance of propaganda in the media and so forth in that. So in her article, Truth and Politics, she talks about the idea that we may call truth what we cannot change. And I guess this is sort of the ultimate definition of truth that opposes the idea that all truth is opinion. Because truth, that idea that there's something inherent, that truth just is, you can't change it, that's what happened. And she talks about it in terms of Germany invading Belgium. She's like, you cannot say that, and I'm pretty sure in that Truthiness quote that they're referencing Arendt there, you cannot say that didn't happen. That is truth. Because it happened, because we have so much eyewitness testimony, because we have documents, because we have photographs. There is such a thing as truth. You have to establish those facts. So she talks about the conflict between truth and opinion and how truth can be turned into opinion. So in the example from the Kellyanne Conway interview, that is an example of turning truth into opinion. The idea of saying, oh, well, that's my opinion, that's your opinion, and this is my opinion, is an essential element of having a society that can sort of function together in a way, because we accept that everyone has, that lots of different people have different truths, and so that's okay. We don't need to have a war about, which religion is right or something like this, because we can have our own truths. But there are problems with making truth into an opinion, because it sort of devalues the whole nature of it being something that cannot be changed, that is able to be established. Sorry? Okay, yes, more of a, for the truth. Yes. Yes, more of a perspective, and she uses the term interpretation, that people interpret the same events in different kinds of ways, which is, I guess, closer to perspective. An interesting point is that she says that factual truth is no more self-evident than opinion. You don't look at factual truth and go, oh, yeah, well, that automatically seems true. in a way you don't with something that's purely opinion-based. In fact, sometimes the things that are true, because they're complicated and messy and have many things within them, can seem more fake than the actual fake material. And because things can be unreliable, it is very easy to consider things like mainstream news to be fake because it has been fake at some points. We do not always then see the truth when it is there, because how are you meant to identify that if you don't have all the information? So I mentioned the inauguration crowd. Is one of these crowds bigger than the other?
It looks like it.
Yeah.
The white is just
So one of these crowds is bigger than the other. They were taken from the same spot. The photographs is a big tower. Someone had to climb 987 steps to take the photo, which is really energetic on behalf of that photographer. And they were taken about an hour apart. So one was taken at 12 and one was taken at 1. So there is a difference there. But this is, I guess, what Arendt would talk about when she's talking about eyewitness testimony or documents, that this is a fact. This is something you can see and you can determine with your eyes. You cannot argue about this. But see, yes, it could have been photoshopped. Testimony can be altered. It can be inaccurate. People said, no, that photo was from a different location. We're relying on the photographers who told us where they took it from and when they took it. So again, could be wrong testimony. Did the photographers have reason to lie? Probably not. But facts, and this is when she's saying factual truth can actually be very easy to question because you can bring up all the reasons why the facts might be wrong, or they might be inaccurate, or they might be putting forward a different perspective, or they might be biased because they were released by Reuters, which is historically, I guess, has more of a leftish lean, and thus it's a piece of biased reporting. So I guess this is why it's hard to establish truth, and it's easier to have someone, force Sean Spicer to come out and go, we had the biggest crowd ever. Like, you then go, oh, but this is this, and then you go, oh, but, maybe that isn't what they're saying that it is. So determining the facts can be quite difficult, and it's all about sort of the evaluation of your sources and how reliable your sources are and what they're telling you. So I've got the question here, what might Arendt think about the idea of alternative facts? I think she would see it as if you read some of the quotes in Origins to Totalitarianism, right at the sort of, and I'm not saying this is the direction, but a lot of the techniques that she talks about in relationship to propaganda and so forth that are contained in there, you can quite directly map to some of these techniques about post-truth and so forth. I'll just finish up here.
Then explain you did.
So in the workshop, encourage you all to attend today. This is a very important exercise we're going to do of working through working through issues about sources and how to use critical thinking, which you will be assessed on many times throughout your degrees, to determine the veracity of a piece of information. So I will see you guys in workshops. Just the 2 weeks of convince. Ah, that's clever.
And then a whole bunch of people took over it and then just building it and Photoshop it.
Yeah. Ah, yes, I can see that.
Yeah, and still with the same caption. And so
Oh, okay, yes.
pushing that idea that he's only read a couple of books about world domination.
Yes, one tries to. There's a lot going on.
So it was like, it was very clearly British. Yeah, they weren't pushing it as truth, they were pushing it as a truth.
And I think that it's different.
Yeah.
You know, it's different. And that's, I guess, when you start to say it isn't fake news, is when it's very clearly, but I think it has to be clear enough.
One of the reasons why I really like satire news shows is because they are actually presenting news stories, just working through it. So they're presenting the story, but it's not actually fake news, they are using real news sources. And I guess this is the distinction between that news, where more like fake news, fake news.
After the first 2 hours, moved on to the